I'm Master Saturn. Thank you for joining me for another BDSM United podcast. Several years ago, there was an internal push, a push within the kink community to erase the words top and bottom by those who erroneously stated, "You're not real unless you're into power exchange. You're not real unless you're into DS." Our BDSM community is almost like 80 years old, with sadomasochistic play going back even farther. So, along the way, our culture is going to shift a little as we adjust to what culture says is popular or what culture says matters and what matters more to us at any given time. That's just the way that culture works. During that time, we were going through a funk that probably should have been corrected by educators of that era. Nevertheless, it didn't get corrected well enough or fast enough, and we still see a lot of that confusion today. We see people that want to identify something oftentimes erroneously as dom and sub in the place of top and bottom when they're not in relationships. They're not in committed relationships. They're not in relationships at all. They just and a lot of times they'll um, align dom with top and submissive with bottom, which isn't always the case. As a side note, probably to digress for a moment, this is why you may see us from time to time coming out hard to correct stuff in our community. You may even ask why it matters. And this is one example. BDSM educators have done a shit job of educating people. Too often we adopt error just because it appears popular. Sometimes we do things like using dom in the place of top and submissive in the place of bottom, and it oftentimes makes people who are dominant feel like they can't be topped, or people who are dominant feel like they can't be a bottom in a scene when nothing is farther from the truth. Sometimes it makes a submissive feel uncomfortable topping, and it just, it just doesn't always work that way. Within scenes, we do things, we give and we receive within scenes the different kinks that we enjoy giving and receiving. Our identity oftentimes doesn't matter all the time. Well, see, we adopt error just because it appears popular. Then we complain about the monster that we created through our own apathy, and we'll often rant about the mess that it's making. So there are two groups of people within the BDSM community. There's often an overlap, but for the sake of clarity, I'll omit the overlap and just say you can mix them or dabble within both groups to your own personal preference. There are top and bottom, and there are dom and sub. Those are the two groups that I'm using. Group one, top and bottom, are two or more people coming together to explore together a fetish or a kink. We call it top and bottom because generally someone is leading or giving or doing the kink to someone else. Top and bottom aren't actual identities, meaning it doesn't really matter who is doing what at any given time. You heard that right. They're not actual identities, meaning it doesn't really matter who's doing what at any given time. You can be the top for some parts of a play scene and then be the bottom for other parts of the play scene. Maybe you're versatile and doing a little bit of giving and a little bit of receiving of the kink. All persons involved in the play scene maintain whatever level of personal autonomy they had prior to the play scene. So if you go into a place seen as a slave to a master, you're probably going to remain the slave of the master all the way through the play scene, and then you're going to exit the play scene as the slave of your own master. See how that works? So you go into a play scene, and even if you go into a play scene and play as the dominant of another person, when you exit the scene, you're still the slave of that master. It doesn't change. A play scene doesn't change your identity. Power doesn't exchange as in a relationship. Some people, they'll role play within a scene because role playing is a kink that some people have. Role playing as I'll be the dominant in this scene and you be the submissive isn't the same thing as being a dom and a sub in a relationship dynamic. I think everybody knows the difference between role playing in a scene and being something in real life. If you role play as a doctor in a kink scene to have kinky fun with someone else, when you get out of the scene, you may be a janitor in real life. You don't, just because you play a doctor in a kink scene or a fetish scene, doesn't mean you're a doctor in your real life identity. The same thing goes with when people appropriate or role play as dominant, submissive, master, slave, little daddy, mommy, baby boy. When you get out of the scene, you're not necessarily that identity that you've been role playing. More people are confused by role playing than any other kink. It seems like it's simple, but they can get really confused. And I think that's because they get the feeling and the excitement of the identities without the actual commitment. I can role play as a soldier in a video game and it feels cool, but I don't have any of the commitment of being an actual soldier in real life. I can get the thrill of hanging out with my squad and shooting up the enemy, but I don't have any actual commitment to be a soldier in real life. Many people give themselves the title of a type of a type of dominant or submissive because they enjoy the top and bottom role play of play scenes. The key phrase they like to add is in the bedroom. If you're just a dom or a sub or a doctor or a soldier or master, a slave, an alien, a puppy dog, a kitty cat, if you're just any of those things in the bedroom, this is a type of top and bottom role play. It doesn't mean if you are it in the bedroom, it doesn't necessarily mean that you are it in real life, in everyday life, outside of the bedroom. Sometimes temporary power exchange begins and ends with a scene. This is called role playing as well. Just because within a scene or in the bedroom, you have a temporary power exchange, even though it feels real, doesn't mean that it is real when you leave the scene. It doesn't mean that it still exists in your relationship. It doesn't mean that it's even appropriate to still exist in your relationship. If you go into a scene just to top and bottom, what begins and ends with the scene is just another form of role playing kink. Now, there's nothing wrong with enjoying role playing or enjoying the types of kinks as a top and or a bottom, but it's different than the dom and the subgroup. It's different than those who are dominant and submissive in outside of the bedroom, in everyday life, in real life, perhaps all the time, with actual commitments and relationships and and all of those different types of things. That isn't for everybody. Not everybody likes to do those things. Topping and bottoming are ways for people to explore kinks through giving and receiving, or doing and having done to you without the requirements for a relationship. Now, vetting and checklists and all of those other aspects of hooking up for tops and bottoms simply exists to help you find safe and skilled people to do placings with. Because kink is inherently intimate, oftentimes people who top and bottom do so with the same friends or romantic partners. Yet at play parties or in dungeons and clubs, there may be some topping and bottoming with strangers who have already been vetted by trusted leaders within your local community. So you can do kinks as tops and bottoms. It's definitely a legitimate part of BDSM. There's nothing less than or wrong with doing kink in this way. As I said earlier, you can dabble in the top and bottom as well as the DS group. It's not a big deal. You do your kink your way. Now, the second group, which I labeled Dom and Sub, actually involves DS or other identities like MS, DDLG, whatever your gender is, and the honorifics that fit it. But I gave them a concise title just to help with clarity. These are the way to explore fetish and kink with relationships that extend beyond friendships or friends with benefits. These are where power and authority is exchanged between people who do life together. This can look like a lot of different things because relationships are complex and people have different wants and needs, different limits and boundaries, different opportunities in life. Some people prefer to explore kink as top and bottom because relationships can be messy and difficult. There's people I know personally who have had different types of traumas and have different things going on emotionally in their lives. And it's just being in a relationship is too hard. It's too messy. It's too difficult. And so exploring kink as a top or a bottom helps them be a part of our community without having to be in long term committed relationships. Others like to explore kink as top and bottom because they like to keep relationships separate from some of the kinks that they enjoy. Those who mix kink with relationships that extend beyond friendships are getting into the world of dom and sub. And we use that as dominant and submissive, but it can be any different honorifics. Because relationships are so complex, we tend to spend a lot of time teaching about this group. Beyond vetting and checklists, this is where we also get into things like negotiations, contracts, collars, trainings, protocols, rituals, goals, rules, rewards, punishments, and so much more. We get into the B and D of BDSM. Dom and sub relationship dynamics require a lot of learning by all who are involved to do them well. Honestly, it is a lot. And some people get into it but don't invest a lot. Relationships are already complex. Vanilla people trying to do BDSM dynamics without learning their shit can make a big or a much bigger mess of the relationships that they have. Also, people who are bad at other relationships are some often likely to be bad at BDSM relationships. BDSM doesn't make anything easier. It can definitely be more fun, but it doesn't necessarily make it easier. If you don't want all of what's involved to make a Dom a dominant or submissive relationship work, it's perfectly okay to stop trying to do DS. Like I've said numerous times, top and bottom is a legit alternative to enjoy kinks with friends or romantic partners. I briefly mentioned about how some top and bottom scenes appear to cross into the group of Dom and sub through role playing. Um, Here's one little bit about how Doms and subs cross into the top and the bottom group. Within DS power and or authority exchange relationships, we often also commonly do play scenes. We'll go into a play scene, for example, when I go into a play scene, for example, I continue to be the dom in the play scene, regardless of whether I am topping or bottoming in that particular play scene. The same is true for my submissive. Because top and bottom are not identities, what me and her enjoy does not change who we are. If a dom wants to role play as anything other than a dom in a play scene, when the scene ends, so does that role play. This too has caused a lot of unnecessary identity confusion for people. A lot of what people call being a switch is simply people enjoying both top and bottom, or enjoying a role playing kink. And they're doing so within an established dom and sub dynamic. So when they go in the bedroom, they like to give certain kinks if they're a submissive, or they like to receive certain kinks if they're a dominant. And they think that that makes them some other different identity. Topping and bottoming in play scenes or in scenes or in the bedroom doesn't change your identity. You are who you are. And me, I'm Master Saturn. Thank you for joining me today for this BDSM United podcast. You can find me and Little Libra at our personal website, where we have some not safe for work content and a lot of naughtiness and memes and just fun. You can find that, and we have some BDSM education too. But you can find that at mastersaturn.com. You can find our podcast and all of our podcast related links at bdsmunited.com. It was a joy bringing this to you today, and I enjoyed it a bunch. Uh, if you maybe you agree, maybe you disagree, it's okay. We can still be friends. I'm right, though. I'll talk with you again soon.